Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
This is a very special episode of Back to One. Screenwriters John August and Craig Mazin host a popular podcast for screenwriters called Scriptnotes. I've been listening since episode 90, and I've always enjoyed their thoughtfulness and their eloquence and the efficiency of communication regarding all aspects of writing for film, not just the art, but the business side as well. And what I want to play for you today is a segment from episode 598 called Writing as Acting. There are many reasons why I'm excited to share this with you. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this podcast, you are an actor or a filmmaker, or you care a great deal about actors or filmmakers. And this, I feel, is a very important conversation between two people on the other side of the camera from the actors who are speaking very sensitively and thoughtfully about the process of acting, both specifically relating it to the process of writing, but also just about acting in general. And I think it's very good and almost maybe even healing for actors to hear this. Having said that, there are a few things that they talk about that I feel warrant a larger discussion with actors involved, and I really want to have that discussion one day. But till then, here's the segment from episode 568 of Scriptnotes featuring John August and Craig Mazin.
Hey, let's go right to our main topic, which is actors and writing.
Yeah.
This is all kind of based around this article we ran in Interesting this last week, which is an old blog post of mine from 2010, where I was talking about how my then young daughter was like trying to practice how to seem sad, how to cry. And so it's this thing with like little kids, like they're like, "Oh, I'm so sad, I'm crying," and they'll like kind of cover their eyes, but like they're not really tears. They're like trying to sort of get you to see things. And it got me realizing that like, oh, she's trying to act. She's like learning how to act. And I was thinking about how, you know, as writers, we are kind of acting all the time. We're all sort of experimenting with like, how do I portray this emotion? It's that we're putting it on the page rather than up on the stage. So Craig, as a writer and actor, I thought we might have a few minutes to talk about the experience and what you see as the similarities between the craft of pretending something is real for the purposes of, you know, writing a scene versus pretending something is real for the purposes of staging a scene.
Well, thank you for introducing me correctly as a world-famous actor. I think that actors probably have as much diversity in their approach to how they perform as writers do in their approach how they write. You know, some writers are organizers and thinkerers, and then they write. Some writers are just wee, and they write and see where it goes. Most people are combinations of the two, and I think that holds true for actors as well. There are actors that are very thoughtful and are perfectly aware that they're acting. This would be the Laurence Olivier, "Have you tried acting, my boy?" school. And then other actors seemingly can't do it unless they disappear inside their character and just go bananas. And everybody's different. But for me, I guess my approach is pretty similar to the way I write, which is to think about what I'm supposed to be feeling and thinking and then feel and think it.
Yeah. And that is a relatively modern incarnation of the actor's, I don't want to say method because that sort of brings it to a whole conundrum of other things that are involved in the actor's method. But the idea that a performer on stage is supposed to be believably in the moment that they are portraying isn't actually all that old of an idea. If you look back to sort of old plays, there was a more presentational quality to them. There was very much like you were playing to the back seats there. And now, I think partly because of the arrival of film cameras, we're in close and we're hearing whispers. This sense of like, oh, this is a real person in a real situation is much more crucial. And that's often what we're trying to do on the page as well.
Yeah. Over time, I think there has been a general movement towards realism, which was not always a thing, as you point out. And for a long time, drama was never intended to be real. It was entirely representational, and it was intentionally so. It would have been strange for people to see things presented hyper-realistically. They would have been bored to tears or confused. And as time has gone on, we seem to have found our way more and more towards a very naturalistic style, some more than others. And I think that holds true for writing as well. The vast quantity of television I think has done more to advance a kind of naturalistic writing than anything else, because there's so much of it. And it all seems to be trending in that direction. Not all of it, but some of it, and, to varying levels of success. But naturalism and truth, trying to create something that seems real and believable while yet being not at all real and rather dramatic, that seems to be the name of the game.
It strikes me that so much of what we learn about how an actor prepares goes back to whatever their education was, whatever the techniques they learned along the way. And so this is how an actor approaches the role. They're doing some work to figure out, okay, this is how this character stands, this is how this character sits, this is how this character relates to a space, this is the vocal affectations this character uses, this is how they approach these things. And to some degree, we may do that as a writer, but writers don't tend to study the same way that actors study. And I think there is some things we could probably take from that. Actors practice. They go through rehearsals playing many different characters. They have to swap roles. They have to make changes on their feet. They have to respond in ways that I think sometimes as writers, we're not being forced to do that. So often as writers, we're always being pushed on like structural things, or like, oh, this scene should move here. We're always looking at sort of the bigger picture. We're not necessarily doing that in-depth scene work, which I think is part of the reason why we kind of keep coming back to these 3-page challenges, is that we're really looking at like moment by moment, how are these dots connecting on the page?
Yes. And you can do similar exercises with acting when actors perform a scene and other people watch and then they critique. That's what acting class generally is. It's like endless 3-page challenges for scenes. But you're getting at a fundamental difference. Acting is interpretive.
Yeah.
Writing is purely creative, meaning unless you're adapting, even in adaptation you are creating, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And then there is something there. That is very different. And so much of what acting is about the choices you make of how to interpret the text that is there. And that's where it gets interesting. And you're right. They do have to incorporate elements of themselves that we generally don't, like their bodies. I mean, when we're writing, our bodies probably do very similar things, form terrible postures. Or not you, I guess. The rest of us. You probably get even better posture when you write. Everybody else is just sort of slouching and tightening up their neck muscles. But it's all mental. And acting is very physical. So one of the things that you do think about when you're acting is, what do I do with my arms? And the answer is nothing. Unless you have something to do with them, just ignore them. But like normally during the day, when you're talking to people, your arms are just there. You don't think about them. Suddenly the camera goes on and everyone's like, my arms. What do I do with my arms? They're just fine. They're fine. You'll be okay. Just ignore them. But figuring out all that stuff is about making choices based on something that has already been created and you are bringing it to life. That is an aspect of things that we don't quite do, or sometimes I think we also misunderstand how complicated that process is. If you are a writer who is dealing directly with actors, the best advice I can give you is respect what they're doing. Even if you think it looks silly or sounds pretentious or confusing or pointless, it doesn't matter. Respect what they're doing, because it's what they need to do to get where they need to go. And you, when you were writing, didn't need to do anything other than the stuff in your head, including get dressed, take a shower, or stand.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the stuff, though, you were doing in your head as a writer, because I find that so often, I'll be doing press on a movie and they'll say like, oh, what was it like to have this person play this character? Or like, what was your relationship with the director? Like, how did you talk to the director about the characters and stuff like that? And I find myself saying like, yeah, it's a weird thing in that like, I am all the characters in the movie, and then like one by one they get assigned away. And it's not like it goes through the directors. Like, it was my character and now suddenly it's their character. And I have to sort of watch what they're doing with their choices of the choices that I made. And so there is this sort of strange handoff. I, played Edward Bloom for many, many years. I played Will Bloom for many, many years. I knew what internally how all those scenes worked and played, sort of what the dynamics were that are driving them. But ultimately, I can do no more to affect that down the road then what I can put on the page and what I can help sort of communicate to the actors if they ask me questions, but I can't do that for them. Ultimately, it is entirely in their hands now.
And you will find yourself landing in a strange middle world where if you are directing things you've written, you have to pay attention to the intentions and the imagined performance that went on in your head, because it does inform how things ought to be. But you also then have to pay attention to the reality of the actors in front of you. And then you have to guide those actors towards what would be a better performance that gets more truly and cleanly and interestingly to the heart of what you're trying to do, but isn't necessarily accountable to the imaginary performance in your head, but rather accountable to them. It's a really interesting emotional and mental gymnastics routine you have to do inside your head. And on top of all that, there are trust issues, because you need to make sure that actors trust you. Trust is everything. And they're not going to trust you if they feel like you have an ulterior motive. For instance, let's say that I cast a movie with, we'll go with Harrison Ford. And I shot a week with Harrison Ford and then he died. Sorry, Harrison. In this story, you died.
Bleak.
Okay. Well, we have to replace Harrison Ford. So
Yes.
I get somebody else. Who would be a good replacement for Harrison Ford, by the way? Who should I go for here?
That's a great question. So it's not too far off in range. Josh Brolin?
Great. So I get Josh Brolin. And we're halfway through the day, and I keep saying things to Josh Brolin that make him think, he just wants me to be Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
I get it. He doesn't want me. He didn't want me. He wanted Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford died. And I can tell he's just pushing me to do a Harrison Ford impression. But that's not what I do. It's not even fair to me. I'm Josh Brolin. I'm my own person, my own actor. I need to get to this part naturally, or else it's going to stink. It'll just seem like I'm doing a bad impression of another guy. I'll never be connected to it. No one will like it anyway. Well, that's kind of the same thing if they feel like you keep steering them back towards whatever was going on in your head as you were writing this, then that is not the same as acting for them. That's just chasing your phantom, because the phantom that you have in your head, they don't have to be accountable to being in physical space.
Yes.
Standing there, doing anything you don't want them to do. They literally disappear like into your blind spot when you don't want to see them. You have to work with the people there, and they have to trust that you are working with them and not someone else in your head.
I think that strikes me that actors and writers are both responsible for doing. It's a difficult skill, and they're analogous skills is they have to remember and forget at all moments. For example, actors have to forget that the camera is there. They have to forget that, one of the walls is missing. They have to pretend that the space is real, so that it feels natural, all the while also kind of being aware of where the camera is, because that is important. Also being aware of sort of like what the other people's lines are, even though they need to be able to react as if they've never heard those matching lines before. Writers have to be aware of well, what is the purpose of this scene? What is going to happen next? What's going to happen 20 pages from now? Why is this scene here? And at the same time, make it feel like this is just a natural moment that's happening between these characters that is not there just to set up the next thing. And that kind of remembering and forgetting at the same time is a skill.
Good actors, I think, know that they need to divide their attention in weird ways. They need to have an external understanding of what the whole point of the scene is. Mm-hmm. Good actors need to understand where they sit in the scene. Are they the middle? Are they the person that's being shot against the middle? They need to know why the other person's saying the things they're saying, and then they need to forget all of that and just be them. But they need to know those things before they can forget those things. So when you are writing, you are hearing music in your head and you're putting notes down. Then you show up with performers on stage, and there they are with their instruments. And now if you're directing, you are a conductor. And your job is to make sure that they're all moving in the same fashion towards the same goal. So there you have it.
I like it. So director is conductor, composer is writer, actor is musician, is the, first chair violin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like it. Good analogy. Reaching back to another interesting blog post from the past. This was on cutting a character and saving a scene. It actually feels kind of related to what we're talking about with actors, is I found myself in a situation where I could not make this scene work. And I realized there was just like one more character in there that I could actually support. And once I cut that character out, the scene felt very natural. Similarly, just this last week, I was working on a scene where because of changes, I actually had to add a character into the scene. It was important this character be in a scene. And it was impossible to sort of take the existing scene and just add that character in. And it seems like it should be the simplest thing. It's just like, well, throw one line to this new character. And like, it just never works that way. A development person's note might be like, oh, just stick them in there. And if you just stick an extra body into a scene, it tends to fall apart. We'll put a link in the show notes to this great video of Patton Oswalt on maybe King of Queens. He was like a small part of King of Queens. And so there's this one scene where Patton Oswalt is in the scene. He has to be there, but he has no lines for like a long time. So he chooses to stand just completely still the entire time. Frozen.
It's amazing.
And no one notices.
No one notices. And I feel, I could be wrong, but I feel like when he did it, he didn't tell anyone either. It wasn't like he said to everybody, hey, let me just do this. It'll be funny. I think no one knew.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. He's the best.
He's fantastic.
I think he's such a great stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
He's got a new Netflix special.
Yeah, let's plug his Netflix special.
Yeah, he's not even on the show. I'm plugging your stuff.
One day. Let's talk about that. So, Craig, you've had this experience throughout your entire career, I'm sure. Is that like so often the challenge is not just like, oh, what is the scene about? It was just like, it's who's in the scene and how do you support those people being in the scene? And there are times where this would be so much easier if I could get rid of this character, and you could find a way to get rid of them if you can. But other times, the simplest version isn't possible because of who's there.
Everything is a souffle. I say souffle all the time. And when things are arranged correctly, it's very hard to get things to be arranged correctly.
Yeah.
It's very hard to make a souffle. It's hard to get the souffle to rise. Mm-hmm. And then someone comes along and says, oh, but just throw one more thing in, or take one thing out, or do this or do that. And it seems very small to them. And it's not. It makes the souffle fall apart. And by the way, this goes right to acting again. There are things you can do where you might ask an actor to do something and you can see them tense up. And I think for a lot of people who don't quite get what's going on there, they may think, oh, it's just like a defensive actor being defensive. But sometimes it's just, in fact, most of the time, I'd imagine it's just them going, ooh, you're going to mess up the souffle. It's a little tiny thing, but you're messing it up. And now it's just not going to be as good. There's no magic to removing a character and suddenly everything's amazing. You probably put that character there for a reason. There's nothing wrong with being right. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Sometimes we're right. And we're allowed to say, oh yeah, I know. It seems like you could just move that one little piece, but as it turns out, it's a load-bearing wall. Fill in whatever souffle structural metaphor you'd like.
Yeah. In your experience, so I could talk about sort of like the sets I've been on in my experiences directing, but I'm curious what yours has been. Do actors know when a scene is working, or do they sometimes not know when a scene is working? Because I've definitely seen cases where like the actors are convinced this is great and golden, and like what we're seeing on the monitor is like, oh, that's not the scene, but we're not there yet.
It's been my luck or good fortune to work with actors that tend to worry that it's not working, than rather just be thrilled with themselves.
Yeah.
So we're all the same way. We're all very nervous and trying to make sure it's great. And there are times where it's easy enough when you're behind the camera to go, that's it, got it, I have it. And then they're like, but do you? Yes. Trust me. I have it. We have it. Yeah. There are also times where, they may say, oh, we had it on take 2 and now it's take 5. There can be disagreements, but by and large, I think good actors question more than they presume that things are great. They are reasonably concerned that they're going to look stupid.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to see me. They're not going to see me. They're not going to see the screenplay pages. They're going to see the actors. And in movie theaters, they're enormous. If they look stupid, everyone makes fun of them. Especially now. Now you can't even be stupid and be made fun of briefly. You're made fun of forever. Forever. You live forever on the internet.
Yeah, you become a meme.
You're
this little slice out of there.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Yeah. I would say that, like you, more cases, the actors are not convinced it's working when it actually is working because they're just not seeing what we're seeing. And they may feel a thing about like, oh, the space between this character and I, like the lens is just seeing things differently. So I'll grant that. But there's also times where an actor is making a choice that they believe is great and it's working, and it just comes across differently. And those are just difficult conversations to have because, you as the director or you as the writer, you know how all the pieces ultimately need to fit together. And so often actors are only thinking about like this one moment, this one scene, like where am I at in this one scene? And they don't know like emotionally where they need to get to, what came just before this. And those can be the challenging conversations to have because it's not even necessarily that they're making a wild choice for this moment. It's just like that choice is not going to fit overall what needs to happen around this scene.
Well, I do try and talk about the moment before and the moment after.
Yeah.
I think the moment after is just as important to just remind everybody what's happening before and what's happening after, because we don't shoot things in order, especially when you're shooting across lots of episodes where it's a lot of stuff. And yes, there are times where they think something is spot on and maybe you disagree, but my general philosophy, other people are different, but my general philosophy is that directing actors is a little bit like being a parent and thinking, okay, I can guide my kid as I'm raising my kid. I'm not saying actors are children. Just go with me for this. I can teach them some things. I can give them some values. I can say, well, I don't like that, or I do like this. But basically, they are who they are.
Yeah.
I can kind of gently nudge this way or that. But what I don't want to do is parent them in such a way that I'm saying you should not be who you are.
Yeah.
Because that's not possible and everything will go bad. I think with actors, you can nudge, you can massage, you can try and find, if you know they have 3 different gears and they're in the wrong one, get them to the other one, but don't ask them to be in a gear they don't own. Yeah. And don't fight against their natural nature. Oh my God, I just said natural nature.
Yeah.
Let's leave it in. I think people need to know how bad I am at talking.
I've had a few mistakes this episode too, so I think we're all good.
No, there are none in evidence. See, there are none in evidence, but mine will stay there forever.
Craig, what you're really saying though is that, casting is absolutely crucial, because casting is when you actually decide what is the fit between this actor and this role, and who is the person who can basically, like, they have the innate sense of sort of how to play this character. And within that, you could make some changes. You could, amp some stuff up and down, but like they have to be able to sort of be that person on the camera. And if you have the wrong person, it's just not going to work. And that's why sometimes you start shooting with somebody and recast them, because like, oh, that's just not going to work. It's just not going to fit. And there's nothing you can do to change that person's performance along the way. They were just the wrong person in that role. Yeah.
And there are times when somebody above may send a note like, this didn't happen to me happily, but they may say things like, there was a movie I worked on where this did happen, where the studio said, listen, we've been watching the dailies for 2 weeks and we think the actor should be more like this. And I wasn't directing the movie, but I remember thinking, that's not going to happen. And you don't even want it to happen. In fact, the worst possible thing would be if that actor went, oh, okay, got it. Because then they wouldn't be themselves. Yeah. They would not be acting out of their own body and face and brain and heart. They would be just acting towards something artificial. You got to dance with the date you brought.
Yeah. I had a situation early on in my career where there was an actor in a role, and the big studio note came like, okay, this is not sort of the character that we want. This is not the performance we want. This is not this is not working. And so I had to sort of go and try to do as much as I could in what days were left shooting it, but also in ADR to bring that performance up to a more comedic place. And you could get 10% of the way there, but ultimately, we had to recast and reshoot. There was no way to there was the wrong person in the role, and I hadn't picked this person for the role. It had sort of been forced upon me. And the other alternative could have been if we had to keep that actor in the role, was just rewriting what they were doing, because it just wasn't going to work with this actor.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
While it may be disappointing, I'm sure it would be disappointing for that actor. The only thing worse than being recast is being forced to be something that you can't be.
Yeah.
And being every day, day after day, 12 hours a day, being told you're not doing it right. Do something that you don't understand how to do. That would be terribly frustrating.
Our friend Rachel Bloom is in a new show called Reboot on Hulu. It's delightful. But in the second episode, there's an actor who's cast in a role on this sort of rebooted TV sitcom. And she is wildly miscast. And everyone has to sort of scramble around to figure out, like, okay, what are we going to do with this character who cannot possibly play the scene? And do we rewrite the scene? Or do we like somehow teach this person how to act in a completely different way? And to its credit, it kind of goes through all the different permutations of what it can do, including like, have her act with her hands or not act with her hands. As Craig would teach her, don't act with her hands.
Don't act with your hands. Don't act with your arms. You can absolutely act with your hands.
But no big arm movements.
Between shoulder and elbow, you really just want to isolate that.
You got it. Yeah. You got to keep it small.
Yeah.
But I would recommend anybody who's enjoying this conversation to check out this show called Reboot. Rachel Bloom is not the only great actor in it, but Rachel Bloom is a friend, so you should see it for her.
Yeah, you should always see Rachel Bloom.
I would love to know what you think of what you just heard. Either reach out to me on the Back to One Podcast Instagram page or send me an email at backtooonepodcast@gmail.com and let me know your thoughts. Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.